The NHL offseason is underway. Where do the defending Stanley Cup champion Florida Panthers go from here? We've got the latest signings and trades, plus the NHL buyout period begins. Who may be headed elsewhere? All this and more on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to the Friday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts so you never miss an episode. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. I'm Gil Martin from Locked On Islanders. I'm here every Friday with Rachel Donner of Locked On Flyers. And Rachel, happy Friday to you.
Happy Friday to you too. Man, it's still like a little bit weird in this like aftermath of the Stanley Cup final, but the draft is a week away. So we're slowly turning the corner to the off season here.
Yeah, it is an exciting time. The next 2-3 weeks going to be very busy in the hockey world. And already here we are, like just a few days after the Stanley Cup is awarded, and lots of news concerning the defending Stanley Cup champions.
Yeah, so in a post-Stanley Cup celebration, Sam Bennett announced that he will be back with the Florida Panthers for 8 years. As of this recording, we don't have a dollar value on that contract, but it's expected to be in the $7.5 to $8 million range, which well earned, to be honest.
Yeah.
And I think that, that's, I think, almost double his current salary. So, it's certainly going to eat up a significant chunk of the Panthers' salary cap. And, in normal circumstances, you would worry about that. But we're back-to-back champions. So, I think Bill Zito has an idea of what he's doing at the moment.
Yeah, one would think that Bill Zito has figured this out. But, the other thing that makes me worry about it a little bit less is that the cap is scheduled to go up significantly in each of the next few seasons.
Yeah, that will certainly help them. I think that assuming that is the salary range for Sam Bennett, obviously, or maybe not obviously, but you would think the next person on the list is Aaron Ekblad, and figuring out what to do with his deal, because I think that you really can only spend maybe another 6 to 7 on Aaron Ekblad if you want to keep any of the other trade deadline acquisitions that help them win that second Stanley Cup.
Yeah, and then you're sort of walking that line because you want to keep some of these guys, but at the same time, is it almost easier from a Panthers perspective to try to just acquire new guys at next year's trade deadline if you're missing one particular role player or ingredient into the mix? Although it is hard to make lightning strike twice sometimes.
Yeah, or Panthers strike twice. Lightning's the other team in Florida here. But, I think it is an interesting challenge for Bill Zito, for sure. I think that looking at the contribution that Brad Marchand made to this team in winning that second Stanley Cup, they're certainly not going to want to let him walk. I mean, I understand he's getting older and older each year, but we just saw what he did in this playoff run, and I would think he's eager to do that again and, keep it going with Florida.
I mean, I guess the question I would have is he the kind of guy at this stage of his career who would stay healthy over the course of the season?
I don't know, but I think it's certainly worth a gamble for sure for Florida, because again, just a huge contributor to their playoff run this year. And I think he provided a spark that the team needed late in the season, certainly helped them be on the right footing and be kind of at their peak heading into the playoffs this year as well, given that, when he was traded, he was injured, right?
Right.
And so he comes back like a little bit later and just is this huge contributor. I mean, I don't know that they are going to worry about that, to be honest, because I think he helps on or off the ice.
No question. And look, let's face it, Brad Marchand is built. His style of hockey is built for the playoffs. He is the exact kind of player you want to add in the postseason to make your team more difficult to play against.
Exactly. And I do also wonder what they're going to do about Nate Schmidt, who was also a big part of the playoff run. Is there room for all these guys?
Yeah, I don't think they can keep them all. So they have to figure out, who they're going to move on from because, even with the cap going up, you still got to fit everybody on it or under it initially. And there's only so many dollars to go around.
Yeah, it's true. It is true. And I think that to three-peat seems almost impossible, but I don't like with this team. I'm not going to say that. I just absolutely refuse to say that. But I do have faith in Bill Zito to be able to do what he has to do to put them in the best position to do that. And then it's up to the players and the coaches to execute.
Yeah. And look, there's always a certain amount of good fortune, whether it's avoiding injuries or the like. But yeah, I think Zito has proven that he can position this team to maximize their chances of success. And it'll be interesting to see how he handles this offseason. Now, while the Panthers are figuring out some of their moves, like Sam Bennett, the Edmonton Oilers getting some word about Connor McDavid and his future. Are you surprised by McDavid saying he's in no rush to deal with an extension right now?
Not at all. Not at all. I think he has some soul searching to do. First off, I think he has to look at his own performance in the Stanley Cup final and say, was this me? Was this the mix of people around me? Like, what do I have to do to win a Stanley Cup that I haven't already done? And I think that it sounds crazy to say this about ostensibly the best player in the game, but there was something missing from his game in the Stanley Cup final. And so if he's trying to decide what his future looks like and where his greatest chances of winning a Stanley Cup, I think he has to have conversations with management and say, you got to get me a goalie that's going to be able to withstand the pressures of this level of competition, because I think that should be number one on his list. And that in order for McDavid to re-sign with Edmonton, like certain things have to take place besides that first in order for him to do it.
And how willing do you think Oilers management will be to, I mean, obviously they're going to want to keep Connor McDavid for multiple reasons on and off the ice.
Sure.
But are they almost willing to make him like an assistant GM in the sense of, you got to get me a goalie? I mean, that's a lot of power for a player to have.
Listen, and it's going to be a definite battle of wits, I would say, because the Oilers could, in theory, say, well, we've got ourselves a Leon Draisaitl and we can build around him. So it's hard to think about the Oilers playing hardball with Connor McDavid, because it just seems ludicrous on its face. But also, like, how demanding is McDavid going to be behind the scenes?
And, what if he decides that his best chance of winning a cup is not staying in Edmonton? Is he going to be motivated by the cup, money, the desire to, stay with this organization and win a cup with this organization, even if it's more challenging? How does he approach all of this?
Well, I mean, not to use another team's name again in a metaphor, but it's the devil versus the devil you don't know, right? So he could look at another team and say the grass is greener over there, but you don't know until you're in it. And he knows what the situation is in Edmonton. And so I think the known entity factor is going to weigh pretty heavily in his decision. But I do think he's smart for what it's worth to just take a beat and figure out what he wants to do with his next steps, because he is absolutely in the driver's seat here.
Yeah. No need for him to make a decision today. He has time on his side. And I get the feeling that they will work out something with Edmonton and McDavid, but you never know. And Oiler fans have to be a little bit concerned with this kind of uncertainty.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely fascinating. And the pressure cooker of Edmonton next season is, I think, going to be escalated even more because of 2 losses in a row to the same team.
Yeah. And, that window doesn't stay open forever, especially in the age of free agency and the salary cap. So how many cracks does this core have at trying to get over that last barrier to winning a Stanley Cup? We shall see.
Yeah, not to mention the whole drama with Evander Kane and the loophole and what are they going to do there. So lots of questions in Edmonton for the offseason.
Yeah, lots of questions. Eventually we will get those answers. A lot of movement now that the season is over, some trades, some signings. We're going to break all of that down coming up next on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
The Stanley Cup playoffs may be over, but we're now into peak summer sports season with soccer, baseball, the WNBA, and so much more. There's never been a better time to see sports live, and Gametime makes getting in the building fast and affordable. Gametime gives you last-minute ticket deals, zone deals, panoramic seat views, and all-in pricing with no hidden fees. Plus, ticket prices often drop the closer you get to the start of any particular game, so you can score big without overpaying. Plus, you can save huge with those zone deals. They pick the best seats at the lowest price, and right now, zone deals are offering 10% off exclusive zone deals for FIFA Club World Cup matchups. Gametime includes fees up front and backs every order with their ticket coverage guarantee, covering cancellations, job loss, and even 24-hour returns. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem with the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.
So we do have some breaking news right now. Looks like the Winnipeg Jets have reached an agreement with Jonathan Toews to sign a 1-year deal. And, to me, this means Winnipeg is still all in right now.
Really, this is wild. Like, I know there had been rumors recently about Jonathan Toews trying to get back into the game. And obviously him being from the Winnipeg area, it was, I think, most likely if he was going to return, it would be to Winnipeg, but there were some other teams in the mix. I think the Avalanche rumors were out there a little bit as well, but I just it is crazy. I think to have him back in the game. Of course, he has not played for quite some time, and he has not. I don't know that he has acknowledged it specifically as long COVID, but it is long COVID that he has been dealing with. And so he hasn't really been able to do what you need to do to be in the right condition to play hockey. But seems like he has gotten to that point. I don't think an NHL team would officially sign him if he wasn't there and they had done their due diligence. But yeah, it does make sense that it would be Winnipeg for sure.
It does. And I guess the big question is, a 37-year-old player who has missed a lot of time, how much can he give you? But at the same time, here's a guy who has won Stanley Cups, who provides leadership. This could be an ingredient that Winnipeg needs to get over that postseason hump that they just seem to have been unable to get over so far.
Where do the Jets put him in their lineup is a big question. Is he now a third liner?
Probably.
I mean, Probably, right? He's
Yeah.
your 3C here. I just don't see any other position for him on that team. So I think they're going to have to definitely manage his minutes very carefully to start off with, because 2 years away, like, it's going to take time. I don't care what kind of shape you're in, but it's going to take time to get back used to the rigors of and the grind of it, including the travel, including everything. So I think it's going to be fascinating to see how this plays out for Winnipeg and if it's a good gamble to take.
I can't imagine that it's a huge financial deal.
No.
So it's probably a low risk kind of a move by the Jets. And I love the intangibles that Toews could bring.
Yeah, I agree. I think there is a lot to that. I do think, are the intangibles still there? 2 years out of the game is a question. I think, he has all that experience, but a lot has changed in the NHL in the last couple of years, and especially since he's been relevant, to be honest. And the Blackhawks were not relevant in his last year there that he did play. So, I think he's going to have to make a lot of adjustments in order to figure out what his place in the game is and on this Jets team.
He will. And I'm fairly confident, if his health allows, that he will be able to do that, just based on the player that he's been over the years. But interesting situation. And I think a smart move by the Winnipeg Jets, all things considered. Meanwhile, the Seattle Kraken acquiring Mason Marchment from Dallas. Dallas gets a 4th-round pick in this year's draft and a 3rd-round pick in the 2026 draft. Mason Marchment, 30 years old, 22 goals, 47 points in 62 games. What do you think he gives the Seattle Kraken?
Well, the blue line has been a huge point of pain, I think, for the Kraken. And I think that anything they could do to improve it is a good thing. And I think Marchment is a good start. I think this is going to have to be a combination of guys like him who can shore things up while they're building and drafting and developing from within. I think it's a good move for them, because something has got to change on that team for sure in terms of having a strong enough blue line.
Yeah, I think that would definitely be a step in the right direction for them. He's not a star, but he's steady and he's strong.
Exactly.
And, we'll see how much he can contribute to a Seattle Kraken team that is trying to get back to the playoffs. A move by the Dallas Stars, signing Matt Duchene to a 4-year deal with an AAV of $4.5 million. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's a good deal. I think it's a good deal for the team. I think it's a good deal for Duchene. I think, Dallas is in a very precarious position right now, making kind of several attempts to punch through and haven't quite figured out how to get there. But I think Duchene is the kind of guy you do want to keep around to keep trying. I think that he is pretty steady and pretty consistent, and, has earned the right to make another run at it with this team if that's what he wanted. And that's clearly what he decided.
How about the Ottawa Senators? Fabian Zetterlund signing a 3-year extension. Good move, bad move, or just there?
No, I think it's a great move. I think the Zetterlund acquisition at the deadline was one of the best moves at the deadline overall, considering where Ottawa is in their kind of rebuild / growth potential here as a team. I think that Ottawa is on the way up, and getting Zetterlund helped them at the end of the season. And I think, if they're looking to make an actual playoff run moving forward, I think he could be a huge piece to keep that momentum going.
Yeah, I think he definitely could help and help that team take that next step, which has been so long in coming over in Ottawa. How about the Blackhawks, Ryan Donato staying a 4-year extension, $4 million a year?
Yeah, I think it's interesting for Donato. I think for him, he's kind of betting on the Blackhawks here to do
Yeah,
the other work, right? Because I don't think he needed to stay with that team, but he could be a big fish in a small pond, so to speak, in the interim while that team is continuing to build around Connor Bedard. And, we'll see what they do in the draft this year. But I think that there is a lot of potential on this Blackhawks team. And if he wants to be a part of building it to reap the rewards in 2 to 3 years, I think that's a good move for Donato.
I think so too. And I think that move can be a win-win for player and for
Yeah,
team. The key, of course, is that the Blackhawks continue to make progress. You get the
right.
feeling they're at the point where they're not going to be accumulating picks and prospects anymore. They're going to start to want players who can get them to that next step.
Yeah, I think after this year's draft, they've got to kind of turn that corner.
Yep.
And it's kind of unfortunate in a bunch of ways, given that next year's draft is a little bit stronger overall, and the opportunities at number one with McKenna are huge. But that being said, like, you've got Connor Bedard. Like, he is a franchise player you can build around, and they're going to have to start doing that a little bit better and develop the other prospects that they've already got and start giving them more opportunities.
Yeah, it's time to take that next step if you're the Chicago Blackhawks. Whether or not they'll be able to do it remains to be seen. But going to be an interesting year in the Windy City for the Blackhawks. Well, more to come on today's Locked On NHL. The buyout period begins today. Who are the most possible, likely candidates to be bought out? We'll talk about that coming up next on today's Locked On NHL podcast. So the NHL buyout period starts, 48 hours after the Stanley Cup is officially awarded. A number of players out there with buyout possibilities. Let's talk about Matt Dumba of Dallas as being a possible candidate, in large part because the Stars are in a bad cap situation right now.
Yeah, I think that's, unfortunate for them. We've talked about the, signing of Matt Duchene already, taking up some of that cap space, and they will have to make some of those tough choices. So, I would think they're going to end up buying him out, but we'll see what they ultimately decide to do and who they prioritize.
One player who I know a lot of Islander fans would like to see bought out, but who new general manager Matthew Darche has said most likely will not be, Pierre Engvall. Here's a fourth line player with a $3 million a year cap hit and a no trade clause, and he has 5 years left on his deal. I would buy him out if I couldn't find a trade partner. The alternative, I guess, is to send him to the AHL and save cap money that way. But what do you think about Pierre Engvall?
Well, I think finding a trade partner for him is going to be next to impossible given his performance this past year. Just did not make an impact on the game at all for the Islanders, at least from an outside perspective. Obviously, you're more of an expert on that, but I think that buying him out is the only way to kind of save face here, other than keeping him because you want to save face in a different kind of way.
Right. Well, Lou Lamoriello, the man who signed him to that deal, no longer the GM, so that would lessen that a little bit. But like I said, Darche indicated that he doesn't anticipate using a buyout, which I think may very well be a mistake. How about the Toronto Maple Leafs? David Kempf, a possible candidate. He has a $2.4 million cap hit. But does he have like a spot in this lineup?
I don't know. I mean, the Leafs have so many questions, and obviously it feels like they've moved on from Marner in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And that cycle has kind of run its course. We just don't know where Marner is gonna end up here. But I think that they are going to have to make some significant changes to this team in order to take a different kind of run at it, because they've run it back a couple of times now to no success. So what is the alternative here except to make some additional changes? And I think that buyout could be a big part of it.
Out in Seattle, Philip Grubauer making $5.9 million a year, but things have not exactly gone swimmingly for him with the Kraken. Do you think they buy him out, or can they find a trade partner? Not at 5.9, I wouldn't think.
No, they would have to retain.
Yeah.
That's the thing. And so they have to look at what they could negotiate in a salary retention versus the buyout cap hit and decide what makes sense for them. I do think the relationship is soured enough that there's no way that he's going to stick with the Kraken next year. It's just how the Kraken could handle it. I do think Grubauer is a goalie, and as we know, goalies are weird, right? And they change from year to year. They have challenges, but they can get out of them, and change of scenery can sometimes help that. So I do think trading him is going to be possible, but with that salary retention. And so I think that a buyout is more likely given the initial cap hit, but the year 2 cap hit in a buyout for the Kraken would be above $3 million. And to have that kind of dead cap space allocated to a goalie is a really tough pill to swallow. So if they can average it out over the next couple of years in a good trade deal where they're retaining 2, that may be appealing to them, even though that's slightly higher than the buyout cap hit for year 1, year 2, or year 1, year 3, and year 4.
Yeah, going to be interesting to see how they handle that out in Seattle. How about the Edmonton Oilers? We know that Evan Bouchard's deal is going to take up a lot of cap space. Where does that leave Victor Arvidsson? Is he a buyout candidate?
He's absolutely a buyout candidate. And I think with Victor Arvidsson, he is a guy that could get a job elsewhere, I think, pretty easily. So, I think it's worth it for the Oilers to buy him out in order to keep Bouchard and pay Bouchard whatever he wants. Now, of course, we're going to have behind the scenes GM Connor McDavid calling some of those shots, I would think. But I do think Victor Arvidsson could have an opportunity to play elsewhere and get, double dip on the salary side of things. So I think it makes sense.
I think it does too. And the St. Louis Blues, Matthew Joseph, possible buyout candidate, certainly did not deliver what was expected of him in his first year in St. Louis. Do you think that they keep him, or is it time to cut ties?
Yeah, I think they can buy him out easily if they decide there's no future for him there. I mean, again, they could try and trade him and see what they get in return there. But I think barring that, the cap hit for the buyout is so low in the grand scheme of things, you might as well just buy him out.
And then over in Detroit, Justin Holl, a possible buyout candidate. Is he no longer part of the Yzer plan?
Listen, I don't even know what the Yzer plan is at this point, to be honest. I think there needs to be some adjustments to the Yzer plan, and maybe buying out Hull is a part of that. But again, very small cap hit for Detroit. I don't think that, they've made a ton of mistakes, so they could probably bury this mistake in the pile, so to speak.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't be that bad. It's only a 2-year cap hit for them. I think they can handle it. But again, try and trade him. If they can't, buy him out.
All right. Well, we will see how all of these play out. Buyouts are a little tricky. They're better off as a last resort, but at the same time, they are at times helpful and necessary. That's going to do it for us today. Rachel, I know you and Erica Elayala will be here tomorrow with the Women's Hockey Spotlight. I will be back on Monday with 3 of our local hosts covering the biggest stories from around the NHL. And the draft, as you mentioned earlier, is 1 week away. So this is going to be a very busy time in the National Hockey League. Have a great weekend, everybody. Stay safe, and thanks for listening to and watching the Locked On NHL podcast.